Welcome to the Seeker's Quest. Good to be here with everyone. Good to be here with you both, Veda and CC, co-host. I'm Radha Priti. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm in an ancient Indian city called Hyderabad. It has many beautiful traditional temples, and it's one of the top Indian institutes called the Indian Institute of Technology. So it's a place where it's a top-notch science, but almost all the faculty here are from the top faculty here are from an ancient devotional tradition called Sri Vaishnavism. So it's quite nice place to be here.
Wow, is that where you went to college?
No, I was in a different college in a different city.
Oh, okay.
A similar college. Not that pious, but similar.
Cool, very cool. What about you, Veda?
So
How are you?
he's in a pious city with pious college faculty. Cool. I'm doing good. Same, my life is just flowing like the river.
It's a good song. The John B. Harrison song.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember. I don't think I've heard that song.
Oh, really? You got to check it out. John B. Harrison, Like a River. It's one of my faves. Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm still in Nashville. I leave today. I had a nice experience here. I got to catch up with Cindy and I got to go to this mastermind business conference thing, which, I've never been very interested in business. I've always been a little bit more like, I liked engineering. I liked working for the government, for the defense system. I was more like mission based in that sense. The thing that's interesting to me about business is I'm watching like all these business presentations, and this is going to tie into the theme today. So stick with me here. The thing that's interesting about business is it's like in engineering, it's kind of like engineering in a sense. Like in engineering, it's like, okay, this is your playing field. This is how each of these pieces move. And then this is the objective. And what you want to do is put this together so that you're optimizing all the objectives. And business is kind of the same way in a sense. So it's like can be looked at as maybe a little bit more simple, like, okay, you're maximizing profits and you're minimizing loss. But for me, the problem that I always had with business is it's like in doing that, you have to draw a sphere around like your circle of concern. And it can be a little bit murky. Like if you're just trying to maximize profits, then who is that impeding? Or how who are you crossing over to maximize your own profits? So it gets like a little bit complicated. And I've always thought this was interesting, just generally in human nature, is like how we decide the sphere of people or living beings or that we care about. And in one sense, I see like, they give these business presentations and these people have some really nice values. Like a lot of times they're like, my goal is just to get my time back so I can spend it with my family. And I'm like, that's commendable. Like, that's great. They're entrepreneurs, they're like really motivated and so that they can get their time back to spend it with their family. But then sometimes as I look at the business plan, I'm like, I don't know, like it's all part of the equation. Like at what cost do you have enough that maybe is hurting somebody else's ability to be with their family. Like, so just like, it's an interesting equation. For me, the question was never like, oh, it's difficult to maximize profits and minimize losses. What's difficult is the decisions that you have to make in the meantime in determining like your sphere of what and who you care about and what you're willing to do to make those profits. And it's like, and putting together a business plan for me, I feel like that would be the most difficult and like crucial part is like, okay, am I making money off of this person hurting? Because if so, I'm not really willing to make that decision. So it's, and so that's kind of been my reflection this week. But then what we're going to talk about today is kind of related in vegetarianism in a spiritual practice. And it's kind of related in that, it's the same thing that we kind of as humans, and in one sense we have to, because it's practical. You have to make a sphere of like where you're going to put your love and your care, because it's not practical to do that for necessarily every living being you come in contact with. But at the same time, it can also be very polarized when we talk about vegetarianism. Like when we have multi-billion dollar industry off of like domestic animals, like having pets. And then at the same time, we don't so much have a problem like killing pretty brutally, and eating animals. And so it's just where we draw the line, and in terms of our sphere of concern and what that means and what we kind of turn away from and act like we don't see for our own convenience. It's all very interesting decisions we make, and it's not always easy. So I'm also not discounting, because regardless of what we do, we're going to hurt some. I mean, we drive in a car, we hit animals on our windshield. So it's like, anyway, these are my reflections. What do you guys think?
That's quite a good amount of thought about business. In many ways, you could say the Bhagavad-gita it's not just a philosophical book, it's an ethical book. And in one sense, philosophy is a philosophical wisdom, you can say, is a tool for ethical discussion. If you consider that the Gita is spoken before a battlefield, and then should we fight, should we not fight? Last time we talked about Oppenheimer and what is a lesser evil to choose. So in the yogic tradition, this word is used for individuals. Kshetra. Kshetra means the influence that we have. So if I'm an individual, it's my area of influence. Now we could go into sphere of influence. We could say now you could use it, whether it's sphere of influence in terms of control. I have some control. I don't have any control. I have little control. That we'll get into that. But the point is that while we cannot have unlimited concerns, if we have, we will be overwhelmed. But then to have no concern at all, anything beyond ourselves, that is also not healthy. So you could say that if we have a pendulum, we have total self-centeredness. That is definitely self-centeredness or selfishness is definitely unhealthy. But now if you go to the other extreme, so we are caring only for ourselves. So I won't say the opposite here is of selflessness. It's more of self-rejection. You don't have no concern about yourself at all. So in between, we find a balance of concerns. So self and others. So who are the others we are going to be concerned about? And how much are we going to be concerned about the others? And that is, so you could say too much self-concern, too much, too little, and there's a balance in between. So overall, if you see now vegetarianism at one level, like I said, I'll make one more point and then we can have a discussion. That see, there is ethical discussion and there is a philosophical foundation to the ethical discussion. Ethical discussion, and then below that there is a philosophical foundation to that discussion. Now, often we use this word, I have my view and you have your view. But under the view, we have a worldview. And if the two worldviews are different, then there cannot be even a reasonable discussion about views. So we need to actually look at the worldviews. So I don't want to absolutize here, but in the West, while there have been many different worldviews, but generally the worldview was that human beings exist in one sense above nature. Hmm? This is the idea, what is often called as human exceptionalism. Exceptionalism means that we humans are exceptional. So this, to some extent, comes from the Judeo-Christian idea that God, that man is made in the image of God, and that God sends his only begotten Son to deliver human beings. So the idea is that that we are above nature. So nature is under our dominion. Nature is meant for our pleasure. So the relationship is that it is meant for our control, our pleasure, our service, our pleasure. So whereas in the East, now again the East is also very broad, but the East, it is in one sense understood, yes, you could say humans are above, but you could say there are all living beings. Now, this is a pathetic excuse for a dog or a cat or whatever this is. Hmm? But whatever, so but if you have other animals, if you have a snake, you have a tree, so it's understood that we are all parts of the same cosmos. Yes, humans are more evolved. So the understanding is that we are all our souls in different bodies. So this leads to a vision of empathy, of connectedness, that in one sense, it's not that we are all just nature. Yes, we all have spiritual bodies. We have spiritual beings, but we are in material bodies. So that's why here the relationship is more of harmony. Harmony then of exploitation or taking for one's own pleasure or one's own enjoyment.
Okay, so what you're saying is because we have different worldviews in the West than the East. This is where you kind of started with, like, we can't even have a reasonable conversation unless we agree on a common worldview. So you kind of started explaining the worldview in the West versus the worldview in the East, saying that in the West, we see everything as nature. And we almost have this kind of hierarchical system that it's like, okay, we're humans, we're the highest. So then things that are lower than us, we could use for our pleasure. Whereas in the East, there's more of a recognition that all the living beings have souls in different bodies. So it almost is like an equalizer right off the bat. And in that way, the objective is more harmony between those souls. The focus, I guess, is more harmony between those souls, as opposed to hierarchical, I use what's below me and then what's above me uses me.
Yes.
Like that.
You know, the most beautiful verses, Veda, maybe I think this is also your favorite, was 518, the Bhagavad-gita. Maybe you would like to speak about that. The Panditaha. Or if you have something else to speak, you can speak about that also.
Go ahead, Pandita Samadarshina, you go ahead.
Yeah, so Panditaha, the idea is a wise person, Samadarshinaha, equal vision. It seems interesting, the equal vision is towards all living beings. Sama is equal, Darshinaha is to see. So it's equal vision towards all living beings. So we often talk about the human family. That's good to talk about the human family. That is at least better than talking about my race and your country and this and that kind of sectarianism. But even bigger than that is to say that all of cosmos is one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that's the verse. So all living beings, we see them with equal vision because we see them all as spiritual beings. And this is it's equal vision with great level of inclusivity. So it's a philosophical way of rejecting the idea of that other living beings are meant for our gratification, our pleasure, our service. That no, we are all ultimately on the same journey of spiritual evolution. Even the animals, even the non-human beings. So in fact, previously the word subhuman beings was used. Now it is non-human beings rather. Yes, so that it's sometimes more than human world, apart from the human world that is there also there. It's all one family, and that actually, while non-vegetarian food is eaten in India also, but there is a almost implicit and universal understanding that a vegetarian ethos is much higher, and people recognize that if you want to grow spiritually, if you want to have a more evolved consciousness, then it's far better to abstain from a diet that involves violence to animals.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because on one level, we get this in our society, like that in the human, with humans, we should all be equal. You know, we've had different like times in our history where certain groups of people have fought for more equal rights, like on the basis of race or gender, like that. So we can feel it if we're not equal, and we feel that it doesn't feel good. And we want to all have this equal vision towards each other. But that's just because we're at the top. It's like, if anything's higher than us, we want everyone to be equal. But we can't acknowledge that lower than us, it's not really so fair for us to look at things that are lower than us, like consumption. Like we can just do whatever we want, and it doesn't matter because they're lower. Because when we feel lower, we know that it doesn't feel good. We don't like it. We're fighting. But we could just kind of let that go if it's lower than it. It doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah, true. Veda, you want to say something?
Yeah, very big topic. It's a very beautiful topic. I encountered quite a broad array of opinions on this topic. So my outlook at this is really what people eat is their expression, is their template of expressing where their consciousness is. And I've noticed when we claim to be vegans, vegetarians, we're also killing. And those people who are eating meat, they're also killing. So it's not that we're killing less than them just because we're vegans or vegetarians. So it's the same killing. We're still taking a soul, but to be conscious of what we're doing and how what we eat has certain level of consciousness, I think that makes a huge difference. I know for an example, I used to have a vegan cafe in Atlanta, and people used to always come in and want to argue and debate, why are you giving them honey? Because honey is the labor of millions of bees, and you're torturing them, and they're becoming more and more extinct. And they would go on and on and on. So much so, I didn't have such valid arguments to refute them. So we stopped serving honey and we started serving jaggery. But there are a lot of people who are very, very deeply conscious about this topic.
Okay.
And I think instead of taking a philosophical stand or a moral stand or an ethical stand, I think the stand should be about conscious eating and nonviolent consumption of food. Minimize the impact of harm that we cause on other beings and on the planet.
That's beautifully put. No.
Okay.
Yeah, can I respond to a few points? Because you have got a
Sure.
lot of discussions, a lot of points for discussing. So this whole point of conscious eating, yeah, I ultimately, in one sense, whether it is ethics or it is philosophy, its whole purpose is ultimately to elevate our consciousness. I can do the right thing, but if I'm doing it for the wrong reason, if somebody is vegetarian but their concern is not for uh, animals. Their concern is to parade their moral superiority over others. Then that kind of vegetarianism is not very helpful. It's they may not be harming animals, but they are trampling over other people. They're using their ethics is just becoming a social cosmetic for their superiority. Like people, we have cosmetics they wear to look good, so ethics just is a way for looking good in people's eyes. So yes, elevating our consciousness is what is the most important thing. And if you see, the Bhagavad-gita also speaks philosophy. It's not just idle philosophy. It is philosophy that can help us think more deeply, act more compassionately. And in that sense, this elevating our consciousness is the most important thing. And conscious eating is actually an expression of either the consciousness that is elevated or a consciousness that seeks to be elevated. It understands that this kind of eating, it is either an expression of an elevated consciousness already, that person is aware of of what they are doing, or it is striving for seeking elevated consciousness. So I have a few more points to respond to what you have said, but if you would like to say something, or rather you would like to say something, you can please go ahead.
You have something, Veda?
You go ahead and then we'll share.
Okay, sure.
I just
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
well, I was just thinking when you talk about elevated consciousness, that in itself is even can be kind of hard to define, because what we tend to do is like what I was talking about at the beginning, like as I'm looking at these business plans and I'm saying, okay, if you're, profiting X amount off of this person and you're building up your empire and they're really going down, at what point, like I'm thinking this deeply into it, but I think a lot of times people just kind of don't think that deeply into it. They just look more at their one side of the equation, like, oh, this is good for me, this is working for me. So like in the same way with like when you go to the grocery store and you buy a package of meat, like most people, 99% of people don't think of the slaughterhouse that chicken came from and how unbearable and torturous those conditions were. And what's more is if you tell them, they don't, and you say, oh, you send them a YouTube video, they're not going to watch it. People don't want to see that. So it's like, in that way, their consciousness, they're kind of protecting it by like, almost like living in denial. But at the same time, kind of to what you were talking about, how do we even define those parameters around where we let our consciousness go and not? Like what Veda was saying, like, is honey so much of a big deal? Maybe not.
I was coming to come to that point. So
before we go, Sissy, I was just thinking how human beings, we have this nature and this tendency to attempt to be God. And I think we have it's a default material setting that we have, that we think that we should be the moral police and we control the ethics and morality of who lives and who dies. And this was something that used to bother me at first when I came to America, because in America, there's one famous quarterback. He was playing for Atlanta Falcons, Michael Vick, and he was convicted for dog fighting, which is completely illegal. And it should be illegal. And he was sentenced, and his career was over because he was involved in cruelty to dogs. But then the same people, they're okay when there's millions of cows being slaughtered. And they have decided that dogs should be, if you hurt dogs, then you should go to jail, and you can hurt other creatures like pigs and cows and horses, then then you go to jail. And if you hurt the other three species that I just mentioned, then it's okay. And you can herd many, many other species. So I think that we have taken the position of God, who has what consciousness, who had the right to live and who dies. And I think it's a very dangerous position to take, that we have become the moral judge of who lives and who dies. And our consciousness is something that I think needs to be checked.
Yes. Yes, this inconsistency is quite striking.
Hypocrisy is hypocrisy.
I wouldn't go so far. In general, like yesterday, I discussed that last time we discussed that there is, whenever we see some wrong action, it could be ignorance, it could be incompetence, or it could be malevolence. Why is somebody doing something like that? So that when somebody some wrong action is there, why are they doing it? So to say it's hypocrisy, well, maybe it is. Let's explore it. Generally, I would like to assume the least negative motivation for particular actions. And if those motivations don't make sense, then we can look for more negative motivations. So it could be hypocrisy, as you said. Hypocrisy would be more on the side of malevolence. It could also be just a blind spot where you will just not thought much about it. And we say, how can you not think about it? And that's something to think about. And let's explore that a little bit. But let me go back to a couple of points which you mentioned. That see, while it is when I say blind spot, that it's almost like there is no consciousness, no conscious awareness of it. We just not thought about it. As hypocrisy is more of conscious denial or rejection. In that sense, the two are different. So
I use hypocrisy strictly because it is a conscious act to increase your bank balance. You know, the greed for making money is so strong, I feel, that it definitely completely, you know, you're inconsiderate of other aspects of
in general,
you're ready to sacrifice certain standards in morality and ethics consciously. That's why I said hypocrisy, but I'm willing to be challenged on this.
Well, I'm happy to challenge you at this point, but I also agree with you that, see, in general, in every society, there is a conscious majority and there is an unconscious majority. And often this conscious minority is what guides. It acts like it's like the standard. So it is a standard, and people emulate or abide by or follow whatever. The Gita also talks about this in 321. The leaders who shape other people's actions. So definitely, if you consider the whole, if butchers always existed in the past. Throughout human history, there have been people who wanted to eat meat, and there have been people who are ready to kill animals for eating meat. But from individual butchers to what, like industrialized slaughterhouses, it's a huge difference. And those who run this, they are definitely aware of the amount of brutality that goes on over there. And I think it was John Lennon who said that if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be a vegetarian. That so there are definitely, I would say, these industrial slaughterhouses. It's one thing to kill one animal and then cut it and use its meat, and it is another thing to have. There are factory farms where thousands and thousands of animals are basically bred like commodities. They are confined to live in extremely constricted spaces. They are given foods, artificial enzymes, and stuff that will accelerate their growth, so that they will produce more flesh and fat in their body so that it can be eaten. And they they have no life at all. They exist so that they can become more and more edible food, mm, more palatable food. Cows are, for example, they are injected with chemicals so that they will breed more cows, or similarly with various animals. So the point is that this is definitely extremely brutal. So what you said is, this is not just hypocrisy, I would call this brutality. Hmm? But the people who are aware of this is a minority. Most people are not aware of it. And the people who do become aware of it, they definitely so they definitely, as they become aware, they rethink their choices. So when I say this is degraded, it is the scale is far more. It's literally millions and millions of animals are killed, not just every year or a lifetime. It's every month millions of animals kills, and then the cruelty that is there is even more. There are times when animals are killed in the most efficient way, even if that means it's the most painful for the animals. And there are in some cases, I won't even go into specifics, but in some cases found that if a animal bleeds profusely to death, somehow its meat tastes more better. So then, instead of giving us one clean wound which kills the animal, you let it bleed brutally to death. So that the scale, the number of animals being killed is greater, the cruelty involved is far greater, and then beyond that, the cover up that is there, that is also far greater. So it's for example, one of the euphemisms that is used is, it's not slaughterhouses, it's the meat packing industry. It's as if your meat is readily available in nature, and all we are doing is just packing it and giving it to you. So because of these three things, I would say that definitely there is a significant level of hypocrisy. But these are people who are in the minority. And like you talked about commercial interests, these are people who, for whom this is all that matters is money. But beyond that, there are a lot of people who are just unaware. So till now, all that I talked about was this minority, the conscious minority. And now here, when you're using the word conscious minority, you can say that this is the consciously malevolent minority. The consciously malevolent minority. They know what they are doing, and still they keep doing it. So quite
Almost like
yeah.
we can all agree that this mindset is destructive, this like only me mentality. How do I get more? I need more, like this greed at the expense of what it doesn't matter. But I like what you said at the beginning too, where like it's nearly impossible to I mean, you can't consider everything, or you just literally won't do anything. Like I said, like even driving a car, you're killing bugs on your windshield, or serving honey at a vegan restaurant, or so it's like, how do we find that reasonable center and make decisions from that, whether it be business decisions or decisions for our family or decisions of what we're going to eat? How do we do that without going down an endless rabbit hole of almost being paralyzed because we don't want to hurt anybody, but at the same time, reasonable way of living that, because the definition of good consciousness, I mean, you could take that so high.
Yeah.
Then you're not doing anything.
We could just talk about is minimal harm. Yeah, Veda, you can speak.
I sometimes think that if we had mother consciousness on this planet, and the world would definitely be eating less meat and eating more consciously. I know when I go to a grocery store, I see mothers reading every single label. seeing what is good for the kids. I want my child to be the most nourished, the most happy, the most intelligent. I want my son and my daughter to succeed. So this is how a mother thinks. And every time I'm in the store, I've noticed that women, they read every single label. And I can tell you, I haven't had mother since I was 5, but I can still almost taste my mother's cooking. Is because it was so conscious, thinking of how to best feed my child with the most nourishing, available food out there. And if more and more people get into this consciousness of reading everything, how to put the most conscious, the most healthy food in the body of our children, and educate that and filter down that consciousness to their kids, I think it would make a huge world of difference. This is what I keep thinking of, how always solutions to how to minimize what consciousness is needed. And I strongly believe what we eat is what we become. It's a transfer of consciousness. What goes in our belly is literally a transfer of consciousness. And if we are eating animals that were brutalized mercilessly in captivity, the fear, the emotional transfer that takes place is what I believe is the cause of mental health issues globally. Because it is simply a transfer of fear to the fear. And look at the weapons, look at the destruction, look at the carelessness in the world. These are my thoughts. I'll stop, rest my case.
Yeah, I don't know whether there was a case or there was a rant.
It's a wrap.
It is okay. There are a lot of points which you made, and I agree that in one sense, both our views and our worldviews, they arise from our family. So mothers are the shapers of family values, and in that sense, the mother consciousness is actually very helpful. In fact, when you use the word mother consciousness, there's also this one point which I didn't mention. In the broad Vedic tradition, it is understand that all life, not just humans, all life are considered to be like children. And the earth in particular, or nature in general, is considered to be like the mother. And God is the father. So the idea that we are all one family, it is not just the idea that all living beings are together. It's a cosmic family. So this understanding, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the Sanskrit phrase for that, it has a philosophical vision behind it also. So just coming back to your point of being conscious, when we talk about, I'm going to address 2 points. One is about the honey. I'll come to that shortly. But one principle we could use is that we want to cause minimal harm wherever we go. So even if somebody is working in a company, every company decides that, okay, these are the areas where we don't want to cause harm. These are the areas we don't really care, or that's not our priority. So for example, now the iPhones and even the Tesla cars have these batteries. Now they are considered to be very eco-friendly. iPhones are kind of very trendy, but iPhones, many of the parts for them are made from the labor camps that are there in Uyghur in China, where over 1 million Muslims are being kept in something equivalent to concentration camps, and being indoctrinated by the Chinese government. But that's the labor that is being used over there. The Tesla cars that we use, often the cadmium that is required, that's brought from the mine from under the earth, and children are extensively used to get deep into the mines. So everywhere, some harm or the other is being caused. Now the point is, while we cannot avoid causing harm, at least we need to be conscious, and then we make a conscious choice. Is this what I want to do? But with respect to minimal harm, if we consider at a broad polar vegetarian versus non-vegetarian food. Now somebody may say, okay, plants are also being killed. Yeah, that is true, no doubt about it. Plants are being killed. But if in the case of plants, there is a big difference. In general, the consciousness is much lesser among plants. So there are three factors. The consciousness is much lesser, and that is seen in from a biological perspective, there is a underdeveloped nervous system. So when a plant is harmed or killed, underdeveloped nervous system, that means that there is far lesser pain that they experience. Because the nervous system itself is so underdeveloped. Now, secondly, if you consider some things like fruits, there is no killing involved at all in the fruits. They just fall off. One of my friends runs an orchard, so he says that even when you have to pluck, say, pears or apples or mangoes, one of the ways to test it is that you hold it and you just pull it slightly. If it is ripe, just slightly pulling it will actually be very easy to break it. If it is not yet ripe, then you have to apply a lot of force to pull it out. So in one sense, fruits, they are anyway going to fall. And they are, after they fall, they'll just get wasted. So we are not really killing fruits. And then thirdly, if we consider something like crops. Now, if you consider crops, they are harvested. They are more or less at the end of their life. At the end of it, what's going to happen is that if they are not cut, they're going to get wasted. So that's very different from a slaughterhouse. So if you consider, if you have a child and the school says that we are going to take our children for a field trip. Okay, where are we going? So I say that we're going to a harvest festival. So at that time, the idea is that people go there, the mood of celebration. Every agrarian economy has a mood has some songs and some celebrations and some rites. It's a moment of celebration, of gratitude, of joy when nature has given its bounty. And we are receiving it. So a field trip to a harvest festival is something which any parent will be happy. But compare that if the school says we are going to take children to a slaughterhouse. How many parents would want children to go there? So we implicitly understand that there is a difference in degrees between the amount of violence that is involved. So in the killing of animals, there is far greater violence. In the consumption of vegetarian food, there is violence, but there's sometimes there is very less violence, sometimes there is no violence. You consider when animals are killed, it is not that animals are killed when they have grown old and they're anyway about to die. They are killed when they are at the peak of their life, when they're young and they're healthy. Most of the time, that's what happens in slaughterhouses, at least when there are industrialized slaughterhouses. So the harm in non-vegetarian food is much greater. I already mentioned the cruelty and the scale and the cover-up, but this one principle we could use, the principle of causing minimal harm. I want to talk about the honeybee part, but any comments on this?
No, I'm glad you pointed that out about the plants versus the animals, because that's a common question I think you get is, okay, so why is it okay with plants? So that's good.
Yeah. So go ahead, please.
I like this point because it is the closest thing to Mother Nature. When we talk about eating something that she's directly providing, there is very minimal human fingerprints. There's, it's not going through a chain, then it is extremely healthy. We always try to eat whole foods. I always encourage people to make their own gardens because not only is it healthy, but it's also therapeutic. It's more direct. Everything that you eat, I don't know how long it's been sitting in the packaging, in what temperatures, and this food just you pick from the tree and eat. It's just like, here is Mother Earth giving you something to eat. Here is all the candies, all the fruits, I consider fruits like the candies. Whatever sweets you want. You don't have to go to Hershey's factory to eat from the factory and all kinds of additives and things that are made just to get you more intoxicated.
Exactly.
So eating
so you might like
directly
this. Well, there's food made of plants and there's food made in plants. So in industrial plants and made by natural plants. So it's far better to eat food that is made of plants than food that is made in plants.
That was a good one. That's really quick. I love it.
Yeah. So I think this is also a good example of as awareness is increasing, more and more people are turning toward natural foods. Mhm. So I have a whole article. In fact, at one time I plan to write a book on vegetarianism in general. I talk about how your food, how the food that you eat can help the world. I use the word acronym HELP. That we won't have time to go into all of this, but I'll just mention this and we can discuss in future session. From a health perspective, there are lots of surveys which actually very clearly indicate that vegetarian food is far better than non-vegetarian food. Especially if somebody gets a heart attack, then the first thing they're told is give up red meat. So by the food that we eat, we are improving our health. And second is we are actually improving the environment. Because what happens is that if this much land is required to feed one non-vegetarian person, then actually in that much same land, if you consider, so let's put it this way, that same land can feed 9 vegetarian people. Why? Because when the food is non-vegetarian, it actually goes through animals and it made into flesh, and then it comes to humans. And when it goes to animals, that means the land can be used either for agriculture to make grains for humans, or the same land can be used to make fodder for animals. But if it goes to make fodder for animals, then most of the food that the animals eat, that is excreted through their body, and only a small part of it becomes edible flesh. So actually speaking, for the environment itself, vegetarian food is very good. Now there is so much awareness of climate change and environmental challenges, but there is a huge emphasis on avoiding carbon. But actually avoiding meat could actually benefit the environment much more, and in a far less intrusive or disruptive way. And then the third is livestock. This is what we discuss mostly, that the animals who live and are to die just so that we can have some food that tastes good on our tongues. That is that all that brutality can be avoided. And the last part is poverty. That actually, now environment and poverty are slightly related. The same point which I mentioned earlier about the same amount of land, if it's used to make fodder, then it can feed far lesser people. But if it's used to make food for humans, it can feed far greater human beings. So actually speaking, if the whole world turned vegetarian, we would have no food shortage at all. I think the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, they said that we can actually, with the existing land resources that we have, we can feed 5 times the present human population, if we just use the land resources properly. So we could actually, just by every bite that we eat, we can make a difference in not just for the animals that are being killed, but for a far, far bigger level. So this is an example of expanding our consciousness so that we can be more aware of what we are doing and how we are acting.
Wow. Okay, we only have about 5 minutes left. After listening to you both, I have some conclusions, I think, of like my opener for the original story in this, in terms of kind of building a business.
Can I just make one point about the bees before I conclude? If you don't
Yeah,
mind?
please do.
So see, I won't be able to address it exhaustively. See, there's vegetarianism and there is veganism. Now, vegetarianism is, that's why I talked earlier about, it's not just a dietary choice, it's not just an ethical choice, it's actually a philosophical choice or the philosophical worldview. So this arises from a worldview, at least in the East, vegetarianism arises from the worldview of harmony. Harmony means that different living beings live in cooperation and every living being contributes to another living being. So, say for example, the idea is that if you consider cows, now some people say they don't take cow's milk also because it's meant for her children. Yeah, it is meant for her cows, but it is not meant only for her cows. Actually, a cow produces, especially a cow that is taken care of in a loving environment, a cow produces more milk. So cows and humans, if they are one family, then there in a family there is loving give and take. There's loving reciprocation. So in nature also, the specific word in biology uses symbiosis, where two organisms not only live together but they contribute to each other. Now there are certain versions of certain species of cows and bulls which can live in the wild, but relatively speaking, cows are tender animals and they need human care. So cows and humans living together, humans take care of cows and cows take care of humans by cows reciprocate by providing milk. So this is the idea of harmony. Whereas veganism, it often has the idea of segregation rather than harmony. That we humans should not be taking anything from the animal world. Now, it is true that nowadays when milk is produced, it is not given lovingly by a cow. It is forcibly extorted. And that's why we have the dairy industry. That is a different issue. But in nature, in principle, we don't need segregation between living beings. So the idea is that there are many beings in nature which produce things which can be used by humans without causing any harm to them, without causing harm to the animals. And then humans also contribute to those living beings. Now, I visited in India a farm where we have a farm in a southern Indian state, Karnataka, where they are trying to live completely in harmony with nature, where they don't even use electricity. So they said that when they have honey harvesting, what they do is in normal honey harvesting, the honeybees are just considered producers, and then either you use burn to fire to drive them away or use something chemicals to kill them or whatever. But here there is a harmonious way in which certain natural fragrances are placed around the honeybee, where a honeybee is primarily, where a honey hive is. And on seeing that fragrance, the honeybees one by one, they just fly away from there. And they go to another place and they build a honey hive over there. And then the earlier honey hive, you can use that, you can use the honey from that. And actually speaking, in some ways, with the honeybees that produce more and more honey, the honeybees that produce more and more honey, they actually live longer. So if in one sense the honeybees, they just stay on one honey hive throughout their life, then they don't live longer. It's like when we do exercise, our body is healthier. So producing honey in some, I'm simplifying a complex ecological phenomena. It's like a bare bones explanation. But the idea is that we should not eat honey at all, or we should not take milk at all. We should not take any animal product at all. That it almost segregates animals from humans. And what we want is not segregation, but harmony, but cooperation, reciprocation. So that is where if we have a more refined consciousness, a more aware consciousness, then we can look at this harmony and reciprocation in nature. Now, is this the way honey is produced today? Well, hardly ever. But can it be produced in that way? Definitely, it's possible. So that's one point about segregation versus cooperation.
Oh, that's a beautiful point. Also, I'm glad you mentioned that. That makes it a lot more clear. Thank you.
Yes. So, Veda, you want to add any last thing before we finish? Other, you can summarize otherwise.
Yeah, it's nice. There's so much to say, but we're out of time. But I would just take 1 second to say that even those who are mothers, they know that their body, the divine is so kind that it provides this beautiful nourishment for the child through their bodies. And it always provides in excess. And therefore, even humans, they have a first-hand practical experience that, they're such loving towards their kids, their body just produces this food for the children. And they produce this more than the children need. So as a result, they have these pumps because it's painful for a mother to have all this milk in her body that is not being taken. So they have to use pumps to take it out. So mothers know this principle. And cows, similarly, I know in Gitanagari, when I went there, I see, the calves cannot drink. The udders are so big, so much milk. So then the cow herds, they go and they just beautifully milk the cows with such affection. So it's a very beautiful experience that all mothers can experience this. And all humans can go to a farm and see, especially in Gitanagari, this farm in Pennsylvania, where they have this loving care for the cows. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
So nice.
So
Yeah, I was just,
yeah, please go ahead.
well, when I came into this, I'm, got in this transitional phase of I was doing engineering, designing nuclear submarines for the Navy. And I was always very comfortable with that because working for the government, it was actually great. It was safety is a priority, taking care of the sailors, being clean. And you could argue any of these points and say, hey, we need this resources to do this. And they would provide it. It was very mission-based, very clear like that. And working for a for-profit company was always kind of uncomfortable for me, like I said, because then you kind of have to make these decisions. But what I've got after talking about all this and listening to this wisdom is if I were going to build my own company or business, it's unrealistic to think that everything needs to be, everything will be completely harm-free to anybody. With your examples with the cell phone, as you kind of break it down and you look at the different pieces and where they're coming from and who they're working on and who's working on them, there's going to be some questionable things going on. But if you use it as a reason to not act in this world, then you could really be, you could be missing the opportunity to make a great contribution. And it's a little idealistic to think that everybody is going to be at that level of consciousness where, ideally we could all be at that level of consciousness where that's not happening. But the reality is that's just not the level of consciousness that we're at. So if we want to if we want to still be able to contribute and influence other people and maybe try to make some kind of impact on the collective consciousness, best we could do, if I'm going to build a business, is like you said, define my sphere of influence that I can influence in that business, and then try to inspire people that I'm working with to make steps towards a higher level of consciousness, and accept that they're not going to be massive steps. We're not all going to be at this level together. It's going to be maybe a company that's working with other companies that are at different levels. But what I can do is make sure I define a sphere of influence that I feel like is a pretty high standard, and then work with other companies or collaborations that I can maybe inspire or influence to take steps higher. Like for instance, when I did work in that office, my team, we had a team, we all sat together all the time. We talked together. We became really good friends. And I always ate vegetarian food. And they would, at first they gave me a hard time. I was like that weird girl. But by the end, they were like, "Oh, Rachel, we just do meat one night a week now." Like they were making little steps to and they were into it. They were like excited about it. So it's like, like you were saying with those cell phones, like maybe if you can work out some kind of collaboration where you could influence them to take a step up in the treatment of their people in the manufacturing part, then maybe one baby step at a time, we can all raise the collective consciousness if we can all be a little more accepting and loving of where we're at. That's what I got from all this.
Beautifully put. I think, the key is we help people elevate their consciousness. Just think a little bit more and consider this perspective. Consider how you could avoid harming this. So what Veda also said that ultimately we just want to ensure that help everyone become more conscious about their choices, more conscious about what they eat, how they live. So yes, rather than thinking that we are imposing a particular worldview on anyone or we are doing moral policing of someone, what we are actually trying to do is equip everyone with tools, resources for raising their consciousness. So I'll quickly summarize if you don't mind.
Please.
I started by talking about how our views, in one sense you could say, our actions, they arise from our views, and our views arise from our worldviews. So there is ethics, and the foundation of ethics is philosophy. It's a worldview. So you talked about how we all have to make choices. Okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to harm? So then I talked about the Eastern and Western worldviews, East versus West. The idea is it's not always polarizing, but that we are above nature or we are a part of nature. Yes, there is some elevated consciousness, but we are a part of nature, and that leads to how we look at nature. Then we discuss the principle of how the meatpacking industry, the slaughterhouses, how they are actually far brutal than what was in the past in the history. There's a scale, the cruelty involved in it, and then the cover up. So there's a small minority which is actually shaping the majority. In this case, the minority of vested interests is leading to the majority of people making choices that are the default choices for them, which they don't even think about. And then I talk about the principle of minimal harm, the difference between eating vegetarian food and eating non-vegetarian food, how the harm is much more in non-vegetarian food. And then this is more or less the last part which we came to, was that if all of us can become a little more conscious about what we do, then through that consciousness, someone might become a vegan, which is definitely, we could say, many ways better than being a non-vegetarian. But then non-vegetarianism is based on the idea of exploitation. Animals are there for our exploitation. But veganism is sometimes based on the idea of segregation. We should have nothing to do with them. But vegetarianism, and we could say almost like spiritual vegetarianism that comes from the East, is based more on the idea of cooperation and reciprocation. So that is where we can try to move, and we can help each other move forward one conscious step at a time in that direction. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you both.